And then we will get into it. To my left is David Roth. He's the Director of International Policy at Amazon. To his left is Lucy Wallace, Director of Global Relations at EIT Food. And to her left is Sandeep Lely, Head of Sustainability in the Middle East for DNV. All right. Well, to get started and just to give people a sense of your work, I want to ask each of you to spend a minute and just talk a little bit about what you do in your company, like what your job is. Since we just have one microphone, I guess we'll just go from right to left. So let's start with you.
Again, my name is David Roth. I work on the International Public Policy team at Amazon. We work with governments throughout the world to shape and obtain policies on behalf of our customers. And so we're spending time here this week with policymakers gathered from all over the world to talk about the types of sustainability-related policies that will help our customers, whether that's on supply chain transparency, due diligence requirements, decarbonization, energy policies. And so we're really excited to be here this week having those types of conversations.
Thank you. So I'm Lucy Wallace. I'm Director of Global Relationships at EIT Food. And that's a bit of a funny name. EIT stands for the European Institute of Innovation and Technology, which is one of the main vehicles in the way that the European Union funds innovation. And we work on supporting innovation right through the life cycle. So that's around education, around business creation. It's also around innovation. And then consumers, we put consumers right at the center of that. So this is a really interesting conversation for us. So my role is not to just look within Europe. My role is to look sort of outside of Europe as well, and what we're doing and what we're doing in these spaces, and how innovation can help really sort of transform food systems. And the reason that we're here at the COP is that my team coordinates the Action on Food Hub, which is a space where the entire food community comes together around climate policy.
Thank you, UGIH and WGO for this opportunity. My name is Sandeep Lele. I represent a company called DNV. We are the third-party assurance service providers of all types. So we are, in fact, celebrating the 160th year of our formation. It's an Oslo-based company, and the original business was in the maritime sector. We started with the ship classifications. And then over the 160 years, we have diversified into multiple areas, and I represent a vertical called supply chain and product assurance, within which I manage the business for the third-party assurance for the sustainability and the climate change services. So we basically, within the sustainability portfolio, we deal with the various types of verifications, for example, the GHG verifications, green product verifications, carbon neutrality. We also have accreditations under VCS and GCC for the voluntary carbon market. We recently, on 7th of November, also were placed in the first quadrant of the leaders in the assurance services. So basically, my role is to manage all the services within the Middle East, basically the Gulf countries, to provide all these services, and then overall sustainability services assurance. Thank you.
All right, great. Well, that really sets the stage to talk about some of the strategies, some of the issues on supply chains, some of the reporting issues. And I think it's important for all of us to remember the role that businesses have in contributing to climate change and part of the solution as well. I mean, there are many businesses that have the emissions of a country, right? And so we need, in general, to have businesses part of this conversation. So, okay, let's get into it. And I want to ask each one of you to talk a little bit about the way that your company either does or advises people. What are some of the strategies to get customers to buy and be interested in sustainable products? Yeah, we'll start reverse.
So we do this, I would say, indirectly, because we are trusted by our customers to provide credibility around their claims on sustainability. So how do we look at the question that you mentioned is we provide credibility to all the claims made by all the customers and thereby help the consumers understand or gain confidence that there is no greenwashing around what has been reported. The numbers are more reliable and therefore they can trust whatever they are reading or understanding from the information that comes their way. So in a way, we have limitations in what we do because we are an independent third-party assurance service provider. So how we speak, what we speak, and what do we tell others, there will be obviously some expectations from the bodies that govern our operations. Within that realm, of course, we do advisory services, avoiding the impartiality with the respective customers, and then we could advise them on net zero, how to develop the net zero services, how to develop their sustainability actions, how to bring in the SBTi, the science-based targets, and so on. So we could work in an advisory way in order to promote the sustainability, and we have good presence in retail sector as well.
Sure. Okay. Yeah, sure. To answer your question, Peter, we don't want to direct consumer behavior. So I guess our philosophy at Amazon is to provide customers with the broadest selection possible, and within that, give consumers the broadest possible selection of sustainable products. And so one of the things that we've been working on for several years now is to offer or delineate sort of an offering that's more sustainable, and we call it the Climate Pledge Friendly products. And they're all certified by, we work with third parties to certify that the products are sustainable. So we have over 50 certifying agencies or bodies that certify these products as sustainable in some sense. So just a couple of the organizations we work with are SCS Global, that certify whether a consumer electronics product is net zero. We work with the Fair Trade Group, Ecolabel, the Forest Stewardship Council for paper products that are grown with sustainable forestry. And so these are the types of organizations. We're not the ones certifying them as sustainable products, but over 50 organizations certify these as sustainable. And then we make sure that consumers can access these products conveniently. And so now over a million of the products that we offer on Amazon, it's up 157% the number of products from the previous year. So more than 1 million of these products now have a Climate Pledge Friendly badge. And you can filter your shopping. So you can go on Amazon and just filter your shopping by these sustainable products. And the proof is in the pudding. More than 1 billion products were sold last year that have the badge on it, which is up 42%. And so our philosophy is, again, offer the broadest possible selection of products and then make sure that consumers know why the products are sustainable, what about them makes them sustainable, and give the consumers as much information as possible. And then they have the choice of whether to purchase that product or a different product.
Yeah, I just want to follow up on that because I understand Amazon, you're giving people options, right? It's like going to the supermarket and there's all these different kinds of peanut butter that you can buy. But I wonder if Amazon is also seeing benefits to its company in terms of its own emissions by selling some of these sustainable products. In other words, if some of these products are made more sustainably, their supply chains might be cleaner. There may be issues like that. So I just wonder if there's a benefit to Amazon too.
No, absolutely, and thanks for pointing that out. So we as a company have a headline commitment to be net zero by 2040. And that's really hard, given all the various types of things that we're doing and the products that we sell, the airplanes, the maritime vessels, the delivery vehicles, and the things that are being produced and sold on Amazon. And so it's easy to reduce our scope 1 and 2 emissions, but it's the scope 3 that it's really going to be tough. And so the things that are being sold on Amazon and the services that we purchase, to the extent that their supply chains are decarbonized and that we're selling more of these products that are certified as net zero, is helpful in that context.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, you got it. Scope 3, which is what I wanted. Well, let's go to you.
So I was just going to add on to that. So one of the things we do, we're a different type of organisation. We're an innovation agency, an independent innovation agency. So we're not selling, and we have a very different relationship with the people in the supply chain. Or I should say supply systems. Supply chain is always sort of the wrong, I always feel it's the wrong term to use. It feels very linear. But what we often do is we act as that independent convener for some of these conversations, so that you're not just looking at it from your part of the supply system, you're looking at it from the system as a whole. And having somebody independent in the room who's able to provide that pre-competitive collaborative space for innovation to happen around sustainability within supply systems is a really sort of key point. And one of the other things that we do is we have a consumer observatory at EIT Food, where we track and we speak to consumers quite regularly. We've been tracking trust, for instance, in the food system. And interestingly, retailers are one of the most trusted players within the food system. They sit above authorities, and they sit above corporates. They sit above, some of the big corporates that we all know and love within Europe and the rest of the world. And so retailers, I think, have a very important role to play, because they have, number one, that direct one-to-one relationship with consumers, but then they also have that trust of consumers as well. So what we do as an innovation agency is we then try and work with the rest of the food value system to help some of those sort of relationships and the innovation around those relationships to move forward.
I want to follow up with you. One thing you said is really interesting, that food has more trust, right, than corporate and retail, right? Yeah. Well, so I want you to talk a little bit about why. That's interesting.
It's something that we've been tracking for the last 6 years. So we do a trust report every year with consumers. So we work with consumers via what's now called our Consumer Observatory to look at trust and to track trust within the food system. Because trust is incredibly important when you're looking at how you might deal with different challenges, sustainability being a huge challenge, within a complex system, is looking at who trusts who. Because trust and mistrust can provide many barriers to evolution of the system as it is. So we're not entirely sure why retail is one of the most trusted, but it appears that consumers within Europe anyway trust the retail sector more than they trust governments or authorities, which is very interesting. So looking at who they trust and where those messages need to come from is then an interesting way of thinking about the challenge.
Okay, no, thanks for clarifying that. I misunderstood. That is super interesting. Along the lines of trust, I think that's a good segue to the next question. And let me pose this: what are the challenges to getting consumers to trust what you say? Right? I mean, we live in a world where there is a good bit of greenwashing. You just turn on the TV and everybody's green and environmental friendly and like. So I just want to ask each of you to talk a little bit about overcoming those challenges, or I guess first what the challenges are for you in terms of trust with customers. You want to go first, David? Or? Sure.
So it's interesting, not from a footprint perspective, but a customer trust perspective. I think the two things that customers see when they order from Amazon is the packaging. So that's a big one to overcome. To think of Amazon as a sustainable company or sustainability-focused company, no matter what we do, like on renewable energy, for example, we're the biggest private procurer of renewable energy anywhere in the world, 28 gigawatts. So we have more than 500 solar and wind projects all over the world. But no one thinks of Amazon as a sustainable company necessarily because they get packages and it comes in cardboard. Right, and it's a very small piece of our overall footprint, but that's what customers see. So they see packaging, and they see the delivery vehicles. And so part of our plans and commitment to decarbonize focuses on the transportation network. So just in the U.S. alone, we've committed to move to EV vehicles, electric vehicles. We committed to 100,000 EVs by 2030. We're a quarter of the way there already. We have more than 10,000 EVs on the road in India. We have thousands on the road in Europe. And I think As we transition from ICE delivery vehicles to EVs, part of that customer trust is going to be restored, I think, and perceptions are going to change about Amazon. The other piece is on packaging, and we've made a lot of gains there. So we've eliminated plastic pillow, sort of to protect the product in North America. We've eliminated single-use plastic packaging in India. We're making strides in Europe, and so overall, since 2015, we've reduced per shipment packaging by 43%. And it's not just completely altruistic. There's a business benefit too in reducing the amount of packaging and the weight and the volume of packaging, given that we move billions of packages all over the world on a daily or annual basis. So between those two things, it's really going to shift how consumers perceive Amazon, EVs for delivery and packaging.
So you mentioned packaging there, and packaging is important for another reason, not just to hold a good, but to also provide information, provide key information about what is in there. Specifically, related to food, because that's what I'm interested in. It's a way we can convene a lot of information about the product that you've got, where it's come from, how it's been produced, what its nutritional qualities are. So for me, if we're thinking about sort of trust, we need to think about traceability and transparency. And we've mentioned already there's a number of different ways there's a number of different labels we can put on things, and there's different ways of then assessing those labels. And from a food sort of sustainability aspect, it's difficult for a consumer because they don't know what all of these labels mean. They don't know which label can be more trusted than another label, and there are just too many to choose from. So looking at ways of aligning what those labels tell us and building in some sort of level of, and I think through sort of third-party verification is really important in this. But actually just having, for instance, if we're thinking about within Europe an eco-label, which has been on the cards for a very long time, but we just can't seem to get anywhere with it, is to think about, actually what that eco-label needs to have within it, and whether or not that can be on all products throughout Europe. We talk about Europe, but actually supply chains and supply systems are not just within, one geographic area. They often span continents, they span different countries. So then we need to look at things from an international perspective as well. So not just looking at it from a country perspective or a country level perspective. So there's a lot of things to take into account with that. And being able to do that in a way which is affordable for the different players within the system is absolutely key. But building that traceability and building that transparency in around the things that you're measuring, where your food has come from, is absolutely key if we're going to build trust.
Thank you. I think you covered most of the points that I wanted to discuss. So what I could add is maybe the perspective of the consumer. For example, within the retail sector, you have so many different sectors, right? Within you have fashion, you have electronics, and so on, apparel, and so on. So depending upon what retail service line you're talking or product line you're talking about, the expectations of the consumers could vary, and that will be one of the challenges to build sustainability for every single product that, and within the retail services, again, you have multiple varieties of products. So how do you build trust for every single product? The other challenge is whatever you do in terms of sustainability is kind of at the back end. It is not visible. What is visible is only the claims that come along with the product. So the visibility of how the sustainability is achieved, I think that remains behind the curtains, and it's not very visible to the customer. And then we also deal with a lot of supply chains. So as you rightly said, supply chains, she already elaborated, so I'll not go into too many details, but supply chain management and getting the right information in the right perspective is a challenge. David mentioned about reporting of scope 1 and scope 2, not scope 3. So how much do you disclose? How do you disclose? Which all standards you follow? Do you follow the right standards or not? So all these challenges, there is a perception of greenwashing, as you rightly said. So basic challenge is to overcome that perception of greenwashing and then to build trust around that. I think that's how I would summarize.
Can I just add something really quickly? And that's on the standards as well. So if you're talking about greenwashing, and we're talking about, you know, what we're measuring, we do need to have standards within there that are internationally recognised across supply systems, and also that everybody uses them. And I think that's absolutely key. So I just wanted to add that one.
And maybe if I could just add one thing to what you were saying, Lucy, about sort of information for consumers. So Amazon's wants to make sure that consumers have as much information about their product as possible. We started working a couple years ago on a product called Amazon Transparency, which is essentially a QR code that suppliers could affix to the product, right? There's only so much room on a t-shirt label or on a food package or an iPhone box. And so we wanted to make sure that consumers have an ability to find out more information about where the product was made or assembled, who made it, where the other components came from, how it was made. And so now more than 1 billion units have been sold on Amazon with this QR code affixed to it. And a consumer just needs to point their phone with a camera at the QR code and have all the information that the supplier provides. Now, it's not quite where I think you want to be, which is a regulated system with standards on what type of information and what's provided. But, you know, step by step, we're trying to make that information available to consumers before it's mandated even.
This is all interesting about trying to get people to trust what they read, what they see in the products, and I think that pushes consumers in some ways to buy those products, or at least if they were inclined to do it, and then they trust and they will. So I mean that's one incentive. But in the next question, I want to go kind of the next step, and that is to ask each of you to think about some of the most successful strategies you've seen in incentivizing customers to buy sustainable products, you know, in retail. Like, what are some of the things that you've seen that work? So I don't know, who wants to take that? You want to? All right, yeah.
Okay, before I answer that, let me put some of the thoughts how I see the retail operating. So I believe retail sector has some very unique features and expertise if you compare it with the rest of the industry. For example, if you talk about electronics, apparel, food, fashion, take anything, retail has a very significant influence on the consumer behavior. Okay, it also is able to shape the market trends in a significant way. And then if you look at the various innovations that have gone into all these sectors that I mentioned, it really drives the innovation. So the way I look at this is these are the expertise which currently are in relation to the mainstream consumption, which is not sustainable. But if the retail sector is able to harness the same expertise and same unique features towards sustainability, I think it will be a great way to deal with sustainability, because all these three factors are very important in terms of driving the sustainability. So I would put it this way. In specific examples, I think it will be very difficult, but if you talk about organic food, for example, it was labeled very well. So proper labeling, proper certification, and supporting it with all the trust norms, I think is one way. So as you rightly said, standards are very important, very crucial. And then how do you build your supply chain to support that also becomes very crucial, because one single element in the supply chain doesn't support that, then you have all the problems leading. So how do you build a supply chain to support the whole process to make the consumer believe what you want to sell? I think that would be the right way, probably.
So what I would say is it's not one specific product. I would say that this is successful when you get a number of different brands who are coming together around something. So I do have an example for you, but I think when we look at something, when we look at sustainability and food, it's very difficult for consumers to get really passionate about it, because we know consumers are very interested in the impact on them. So the impact on them from a food perspective is around health and taste. Those are the primary factors. So they will say that they're interested. So there's an attitude behaviour gap. Consumers will say that they're interested in sustainability. So we have 71% of consumers saying that. But then 49% of consumers actually then buy sustainably in terms of food. So there is a gap, and it's well known. We've looked at it through our consumer observatory as well, so there is evidence out there for that. So doing something which you're maybe doing from a sustainability perspective, but that you're doing and you market as a health benefit or as a taste benefit is really good. So one of the good examples that I've seen recently is around sort of plant-based milk. And I can say this from the UK, you know, this is what I see sort of when I'm at home, when I'm watching the TV, when I'm looking at my phone, when I'm purchasing in stores. And we've had some really good marketing from brands like Oatly, who have marketed their oat milk really, really well. They've done it in quite a disruptive way. And a lot of that is around taste. And then you've got people like Alpro coming on board, they've just put out a really, really nice sort of advert, which is on TV, it's online, and it shows people using that plant-based milk, and it's actually oat again, their oat plant-based milk in lots of different situations and how it's tasty. They're maybe dipping biscuits in. They're not looking at it from a sustainability aspect. They're looking at it from a health and a taste aspect. So it's when you get lots of brands coming together and I suppose sort of like, you know, changing things together, looking at what the system is going to say, that it really, really really makes a difference. And then that's supported by retail, because then you go into a supermarket and you see the plant-based milks alongside the cow milk, which is amazing. So it's not just one. I think that my point is it's not just one brand that does it. It's not just one product. It needs to be done from several different angles.
And then I would only add that I think government has a role to play. And so in the EU, we see the Green Claims Directive, right? And it comes back to what you were saying about customers being able to trust what a retailer or an online retailer or a third party certifier is saying. And governments, I think, have a responsibility to make sure that those certifying bodies are actually meeting certain standards, and that companies that are making green claims are actually they're actually justified in making those claims. And so I think that's a conversation that Amazon is interested in having here and throughout the year, is with governments that are interested in trying to set a standard for certifying agencies.
I'll just say one thing I liked about all of your answers is none of you said what I thought would be one of the most obvious ones, and that is, how do you get people to do it? You lower the price, you know, of whatever it is, whatever the product is, and I know companies do that. I know Amazon, you know, gives incentives for the packaging, right? You can agree to have several things that you wanted today all put together in one, and then you get, you know, small amounts of money. But the fact that none of you said that, I think, just shows how much this conversation has advanced in the last years, right? It's not just cheaper, right? There's a lot of other things that I think consumers are thinking about when they buy things, whether it's health, whether it's wanting to do the right thing for the planet, like all those things are really important. So kudos, I mean, for that. I like that. All right, well, we've talked sort of on the edges of supply chain, and now let's get to supply chain. And this is an area that's incredibly important. I'll tell you, from a news perspective, it's kind of hard to write about, to talk about, because it's not something that the average reader, I mean, you get something from one place or another, but if you want to see people's eyes kind of glaze over, start talking about scopes of emissions. You know, imagine like readers, and so it's a challenge, but it's vitally important. So let me ask each of you, and maybe this time we'll start with you. What are a couple of things that retailers can do, coming back to the issue of trust, to make sure customers know about supply chains, and to verify, like on your own end, before you get to that label that says X, Y, and Z happened, what are those things that need to happen, if that makes sense? You want to start with you, or is that okay?
Yeah, I think what is possible there is in terms of labeling. So the labeling itself can be done in a way that it has some links to the information, underlying information, and the consumers has an easy access to that. There are ways that you can do the embedded reality, for example, and ensure that that link has kind of information or even visuals, videos to show how the sustainable whole supply chain is supporting the process of sustainability, what actions the particular retailer has taken on the supply chain side to achieve the sustainability, and how each of the links within the supply chain is following the respective standards. For example, now as Dr. Wallace rightly said, the supply chain is not necessarily in one location. It could be in different jurisdictions, legally, regulatory wise. And then each of those links will have to follow those regulations and then comply with the expectations of the retailer. So how is this ensured? How is this made visible to the consumers, and how the uh, information about this is communicated is important. So this is one way I could say that complete information and ensuring that the entire data process of accuracy, reliability, completeness, everything is ensured. Conveying that properly could be one way of looking at this.
And I think I'd add on to that some just really good storytelling, because I think, you know, data and technology, it can be a bit boring for a lot of people. It can turn people off, you know, that really sort of technical supply chain information. But if you're really clever around storytelling, you know, where does my food come from? Where does this product I've come from? What journey has it had? Things like that can be really compelling if they're done in the right way. And there's some really good examples of supermarkets who are doing that already. So people like Waitrose in the UK are doing some really nice storytelling around a lot of their products. You know, going back to the farm, and then what happens to their products. Even people like McCain as well have been showing through advertisements the journey that their potatoes take, which is quite nice. You know, it's really interesting, and it's things like that is you know, being able to convey that information via storytelling rather than data is more compelling for consumers. The data should be available, but a lot of people aren't going to read it or look at it, and it won't mean anything to a lot of people.
I think for us, the two things I want to talk about both revolve around transparency. So Amazon's a bit of a complicated company. We go out and we procure lots of things on our own. And then the other part of the company is a marketplace for other companies to sell products, right? So we call it first-party sales and third-party sales. And on the first-party sales, we make available publicly online all the list of all the factories that we source from. So if a consumer it's usually a rights group or a third party, has a question about sort of the practices of a product that's from a factory that's producing products that are sold on Amazon, they can go see where their factory is. We put the address on, we put on information about what that factory is making for Amazon, and a third party can go and check out the factory. And I think not all online retailers make that available. You can go online, see the map, you can see the factory information, and I think that's a big piece. The second piece is supply chain standards. So we require certain conduct from all the companies that sell to us directly, but also all the third parties that sell on Amazon. And again, the supply chain standards are public, but just a few things that we require from the providers in our supply chain standards: no use of child labor, no use of forced labor, prohibition on recruitment fees when they are trying to fill their workforce. They're not able to discriminate on gender or race or national origin. Suppliers have to have a grievance mechanism. So if employees at those factories are concerned with something that's going on in the factory, they have an ability to voice their concerns. And whenever we become aware of issues for any of those things, Amazon investigates, and then we work with the supplier to remediate. If they're not able to remediate, they're prohibited from selling on Amazon. And so those are the types of things that we do to try and provide customers so the confidence that when they're buying something on Amazon, that it's a product that's being made responsibly.
You kind of brought me to my next question, and you already answered it. So I'll ask the others to answer it, and that's looking at ethical sourcing, right? Of products, of energy, of all well. Talk a little bit about that in your jobs, like where that comes, because I mean you talked about if you're made aware of something, then you investigate, and then I imagine Amazon sometimes will stop working with people who are not complying or not doing what they say. How does that work for you guys in both of your fields?
I mean, we don't source, so it's a bit of a different question for us, I suppose. But I just wanted to sort of go back to what David was saying here, and I think something that which would be very interesting is when you do then investigate, is publicising that. Because if you're going to build trust, you can't just tell the good stories. You have to tell the bad stories, or you have to say when you have to tell people when you've taken action. And I think that's if you're thinking of it from an innovative way, of building trust, that is what we would look at doing. So yeah, we don't source. So it's I think that's where I would come at the question from.
No, I don't think I have to add anything on top of that. Yeah, is that okay?
But in your case, I mean, you guys are working on standards and verifying standards, and so what do you do if you don't find that the companies meet the standards? I mean, you just say, well, we can't certify you, or is there a process for them to remediate? I guess that's a better way of asking the question for you.
So we're working with an organisation called Foundation Earth, who look at. They did some LCA analysis. They've got a methodology for doing LCA analysis on food. We've actually integrated them into EIT Food to create an international alliance for food impact data, which was recently announced. So what we're doing with that is we're creating an alliance to look sort of across the whole supply chain, to work with different organisations who work on supply, who work on production of food, to look at those standards together. So I think this is made a lot easier if you bring everybody around the table, and you can't do that if you're coming at it from another sort of perspective from the corporate sector. I think you have to look at it from an independent perspective. So in order to kind of change that system, we're bringing everybody around the table to discuss what these data standards should be. If they're involved within that, then we hope that they will then look at a way of complying with those standards. So if you involve people in the conversation, you've got more likelihood of getting them to comply. If they don't comply, then they're out.
Yeah, I think in our case it is simple in the sense that all the standards that we consider for any kind of verification or certification, you can look at them in two ways. Some of the requirements within a given standard is a shall requirement, and some others are should requirements. So when we are doing any activity of assessment or audits, if we come across any requirement which is falling under the shall requirement, and then the data doesn't support that, then obviously we will have to say no to the certification or verification. But if it is not a shall requirement, if it is a should requirement, then there is always a provision for improvement. And then we could certify because all the shall requirements have been met. But then we make areas for improvement kind of suggestions to the whole supply chain or the respective customer, so that next cycle we look at those improvements, and they have improved, then we go step by step in terms of improvement. At certain point of time, some of those requirements turn into shall requirement because the standards change, and then the norms change, and so on, and then this cycle continues.
wanted to pick up on one thing that Lucy was suggesting, which is information sharing with others, companies. And I mentioned remediation. Our first choice is to go in and try and remediate the situation to fix the issue for the workers in a factory, for example. If we're unable to remediate and the employer isn't able to fix the issues that are the underlying issues, we prohibit them from selling on Amazon or we stop sourcing from them. That's not the end of the story, because we want to make sure that other companies that might be sourcing from that same factory are aware, like a Target or a Walmart or a Levi's, Marks and Spencer, whatever the company is that might be sourcing from that same factory, so that they're also aware. And so we work with third-party associations like RBA, for example, to make sure that other companies that are in the same space as us are aware of issues at the factory. Because I think your point is valid. If others aren't aware, they're going to continue to source, and the problems will continue to exist.
Yeah, and I would add that putting people on a list and sharing that, people who are violating, is incentive for them not to do that in the first place, right? And I think that's really powerful. So up till now, we've talked about mostly, what retailers are doing on their end and the certification of different things. We haven't talked about government and the role of policy. And before the panel, Sandeep and I were speaking, and he was talking about how in the Middle East there isn't a whole lot of regulation, right, of kind of the standards that you guys are certifying. So let me ask generally, and I know it's maybe a little bit different question for each of you, because you're in different fields and different sides of this coin. What role do you see governments playing in 2024? I mean, I think in sort of an old view of business is companies want to be able to do what they can do, and not have a lot of red tape and stuff. But I more and more I see companies actually advocating for policy because they want to be on the same playing field in some ways. So I want to ask each of you to talk about the role of government in an ideal world, right? Who wants to take that one first? Okay.
Everybody needs policies. All the players within the sustainability definitely need policies. And one of the very prominent examples we came across very recently, I won't name the country or the company, but in one of the countries where one of my colleagues was to be a panel member, when she reaches there and meets the organizer person within the certain industry, he is complaining that their company wants to do so many things, but the local government doesn't have any policies. So whatever they want to do, there is no supporting infrastructure available to do whatever they would like to do in terms of sustainability, reporting, trust building, and so on. So definitely it is important, because you want to have a proper direction in the way you want to go. Other way to look at this is, as you were probably hinting, that the consumer is not willing to pay higher price, and therefore the consumer may not be willing to buy the sustainable products. So if the policy come in a way that they support the sustainable products over unsustainable products and recommend, or somehow not exactly mandate, probably policies may not be able to do that, but somehow support the sustainable products over the other ones, maybe that is where the help can come in terms of promoting sustainable consumption. Standardization, so far Apple had its own charges, now everybody has C-type charges. So the moment you have standardization of the specifications across the products, it helps a lot in sustainability. So I think the governments and the policy makers definitely have a role in terms of ensuring and promoting sustainability through the way that they would promote sustainability, through the way that they would encourage the various mechanisms that go under the, like we have now Article 6.4 agreed upon. So how do we promote, how the governments promote that, how do the NDCs are implemented in terms of local regulations is also important.
And I think it's exactly as you were saying around the level playing field as well. I mean, being able to take some decisions around sustainability, around the way you operate as a business, when everybody else is having to take the same decisions, is absolutely the way forward. I think the issue that we have is that often policy lags behind some of these things. So, I mean, we're at the COP. This is international climate policy that we're talking about here. And, you know, the conversations here are often a bit slower than we would like. But it doesn't mean that we can't, as, you know, as non-state actors, that we can't move things forward. And I think that, you know, that retail, that the corporate sector has a big role to play in that, in testing things. But in order to do that, they have to come together. So it's not about one company doing something, it's about several companies coming together and doing something and making a change and testing it. So if we're talking about standards, people coming together and testing that together, and then going back to you know, whichever government they're working with, whether it's something which is more on an international level, or whether it's something which is on a country level or a regional level, and then, you know, providing some input on those findings, you know, saying, well, actually we found this was really useful. So if you were able to legislate for policy around X, Y, and Z, the work that we've done as a community, rather than as an individual organisation, because individual organisations can be accused of lobbying, but as communities, then you have a bigger, you know, you have a bigger sort of, a bigger stake, and you reduce your risk together.
There's a lot of interesting things taking place on emissions transparency and reporting, right? But now it's going beyond emissions to one of the areas that I'm excited about is human rights and due diligence, right? So in the EU, we've seen the German Supply Chain Act, for example, or CSDDD, which requires actors to publicize the human rights due diligence that they're doing throughout their supply chains, which I think is great, as long as it's standardized, not just in the EU, but across, right? And it just can't be the EU. It's got to be other governments as well. As long as it's a standard form of reporting and transparency requirements, that's one piece. The harmonization is one piece. But the second piece is what companies are in scope. It should be broadly applied, so it's not just a handful of companies that are in general doing the responsible thing to begin with. It should be applied evenly and broadly to capture all the companies that might be a little less responsible or a little more scrupulous, right? So that the intention of the law is met by all the companies in the supply chain. So that's one of the things that we talk to policymakers quite a bit about, is that the harmonization piece and then broad scope and applicability.
And, you know, there's the level playing field within countries, but then also internationally, right? And that gets more complicated. But that's part of what, you know, gets sorted out at COPs and things, you know, in theory at this level. Well, we're almost out of time, but to finish, I want to ask each of you to think about one big thing that you're thinking about. It could be two if you want, or a host of things, but one, in 2025, when it comes to retail and sustainability. It could be a new law coming, or something that you think is going to change under the next administration in the U.S., or just kind of anything that's on your mind as we close out 2024 and get ready for next year. Who wants to start? Okay, you've been starting a lot. You're a volunteer.
Yeah, I think one point that probably we have not touched yet, I would emphasize on that if I have to single out anything. So we talked about a lot of supply chains and all, but the data associated with that, and how is the interoperability of the data, interconnectivity of the data, the software that go around, and are they able to talk to each other and so on. So if we have to build reliable information around sustainable products and make the consumption sustainable, it is equally important that the whole data set is robust enough. So I would point out to the interoperability of the data in terms of this topic.
So for 2025, one thing that I'd really like to see is progress on an eco-label for Europe. And actually an eco-label that is is one that is one that's usable for people. So, you know, I spoke before about LCA, life cycle assessment, and for the food system, that's incredibly sort of labour intensive and expensive. So we want something which is you know, doable, which is affordable, and which is sort of involves the whole food system, and with retailers to be involved in that as well, so that it's something that consumers can actually use, and it's something that brands can then apply. And so I'd love to see progress on that, because I feel it's it's sort of stagnated a little bit at the moment. We've been discussing it for a long time. You see a lot of different labels popping up, and it would be good to see some sort of standardization across that.
I guess what I'm looking ahead to in 2025 is a potential trade war and the impact on cross-border trade in goods and services. And that really concerns me when it comes to sustainability-related products, right? And all products, to be frank. But sustainability-related products need to get into the hands of consumers wherever they're produced. And if you see additional tariffs being imposed on cross-border trade from the U.S. and then in retaliation by other countries on products that are produced in the U.S., it really harms consumers and their ability to purchase those types of products. And so spending a lot of time thinking about what 2025 looks like when it comes to tariffs and a trade war.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. Sometimes sustainable products are more expensive, right? And if you add trade wars to it, it can make them even more expensive. And I think there's a point for customers, even the ones who are most interested, where something just becomes too expensive, right? And they don't buy a sustainable product or organic or whatever it is, because it becomes a pocketbook issue. Well, I want to thank you three. This has been a lot of fun. I think this is a really important conversation to be having at a climate conference and just in general. So thank you all very much. And thank you to everybody out there for being with us. Thank you. Bye-bye.